So we tend to try to have, at least up until now, 2 releases a year. A major release that comes out with new functionality, fixes, new reports, and I make a list of everything that should be in that release that I am going to then contact each individual client and give you the deployment of that release. And then we usually coordinate a time to do that. So in this case, coming up will be in version 7, and I have a full, this is as of now, document with our notes for all of our fixes and included features in this new release. It's important to just maybe peruse that for people who report things to us, and we reply back and say, okay, we made a JIRA, it's JIRA number XYZ, and then you can cross-reference if you've been waiting for us to work on something. Oh, this new release has that fix included in it, or that new feature that you requested. And so you can cross it off your list. When we deploy it to you, you might want to test it, make sure it does what you were expecting it to do, or you know, work with us to even create more improvements to it. So what I did for this purpose is I made a little revised set of notes, just kind of highlighting some things that might be of interest to this group, and then just kind of a way to introduce you to some things that come out in the release notes that you might want to keep your eye out for. So in this new release, we have a new report, a new AV21, and this is a description of what that report is. So while making this new set of release notes, it occurred to me that when we create the title of these JIRAs, it would be helpful for us to say new feature, and then it would call your attention to this is something that's brand new. So from now on, any new JIRAs that we create, I'm going to try to make the title as helpful to you users as possible. Did someone have something? Is someone saying something? Okay. So then you've got something easier to read or understand what we might be calling your attention to. At the beginning of the new release period, I usually send out an email to all of the users and ask, okay, we're getting ready for a new release for the next go round. Every client sends us their #1 preferred JIRA that they would like us to work on. And typically it's something new or a revision to things. And so I put together that list of the requested JIRAs. I send it out to all the clients so that you know what we would be working on in this next upcoming preparation for the next release. That way also, if you see that someone's requested something that you also wanted, then you can revise yours and maybe ask for something else to be worked on. So it's important when I go out there and notify everybody that we're going to have a new release and that I'm looking for your ideas for new things to send me your client idea or request. I keep that list and we don't make a new release until absolutely everything on that list is in the new release that we have. Actually, I don't know if I have it up. I don't have I don't have the list readily available. I can go get it for this upcoming release. Let me just see if I can get to it here. This is just my notepad, and some people don't send me anything, so we don't have something that's being geared towards a British Columbia or a Delaware at this point. Actually, this past release date, we did a cluster analysis for Delaware, so I think that was really our focus for Delaware, although I don't include it in here because it doesn't have anything to do with the release that is an impact for any other clients. So these, if you can read my screen, it seems like it might be a little bit small, are the release or the requests that we got from every state. And you can see that some states didn't put in any requests, although Minnesota did, but it kind of fell off because we changed focus on some of the things that we're working on for them, which we'll talk about coming up at some point in our discussions. I don't remember at what point in the agenda. So we'll see some of these coming up when I'm talking about them in our next session, and a few of them may be discussed when I look at our release notes now. So here's another one that is in the upcoming release. The scheduler was not always excluding counts that had been entered in the manual entry screen. We wrote a reader for TMG 2013 volume. We have QC checks changed the way we were checking data during processing. It's kind of hard to describe how it was. So it used to, as soon as the reader found, or the QC found a failure, it would stop checking for further failures of that type of QC. So if they found that lane 1 had over the threshold of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Consecutive zeros, it would throw the error and let you know lane 1, 7 to 7 zeros failed, and then it would move on to the next QC, whatever that might be. So now we can have a setting that says, keep checking. List lane 1 if it has that problem, and negative lane 2 if it has that problem. That way the user knows that if they fix one lane, they may need to also look at the other, but we weren't calling the attention to every road element that was having that problem. Hopefully that makes sense. Someone, I can't see comments or anything, so if someone has a question in the chat, maybe Laura could let me know. We created a notes report. Now you can create a report on anything notes related. This was important for Iowa to warn users if they change an intersection in the turning movement, if it's going to also affect underlying data. That tended to be a problem for their historical data if they changed the current configuration. Okay, so here's an example I just wanted to show of a JIRA that we send out the notification for, and it has a setting that's required to be filled out or changed if you want the behavior of this functionality to change in the way the system is working. So I always tell the user there is an internal setting, what the internal setting is called, and what the values mean. If you set that to true, it does this. If you set it to false, it does this. And this had to do with also a little bit what we were talking about, checking all road elements. This has to do with the hierarchy of how to check for the QCs, starting with every lane and then go to the direction and then end with the roadway. And you can turn this on if you want this extra QCing done on all of your road elements, or you can turn it off if you don't want it to do that. Maybe you don't want to see the message 5 times because it's going to happen in all 5 of your lanes, or all lanes plus roadway plus directions. I left this one in here just mainly to show when you see the release notes, when there's an internal setting, this will call out how it works. Typically, Laura and I, maintain the internal settings and creations but it's also good for users to know that they are out there. There is an internal settings screen, and there are lots of settings in there that are controlling the way your system works. This release has the HPMS metadata report in it. These two reports were failing when too many sites were included. So if you were on the screen and you were asking for a DC01 and you asked for 700 sites, it wasn't able to send 700 DC01s or 700 DC05s, and so that was resolved. I'm thinking that this must have come up for a particular customer. I don't know who that is at the moment. This is a very interesting one, and I'm going to demonstrate it in our next session. Now you have the ability to export short-term data to a CSV file and provide it to other users in the community. Currently, you would only be able to export your data for continuous sites that have your station record filled out, and you'd get the TMG export, and you could provide that to people. But Kentucky apparently shares their data with others and wanted a way to share short-term data, and so we created a short-term data export. CAT, I just included this here just as a reminder that we have a new feature that Joe will be demonstrating, the short-term count analysis tool. And so there you'll see when you're reading through the release notes that there's mention of CAT things. So when you get the release notes from us and you see something that might be of interest and you're not sure what it is, then you can copy it, email me and Laura. We can write back to you and let you know what the function is that you might be asking about. So there is a thing in the note settings for a no AADT. And so if you know ahead of time in a year that you don't want to use holiday data for 2021, so you're going to set your Memorial Day weekend, you're going to set your Christmas Day, maybe you're going to do no AADT notes for holiday notes, or even maybe just special functions that you know are coming up in that year. Now, if you put that note out there, it will work in the future when you run the data, not just applying the note to data that's already in the system and doing it after the fact. We have a new reader from Minnesota collection. They've got SDR, it's a side fire radar, and it's a per vehicle reader. So I'll try and call out any new readers that we have also. We are running data for, currently I think only Wisconsin is using Turtle, but I think possibly Missouri has looked at Turtle PVR files. And I've left this one in here because we have a term in Jackalope called rectangularize. And when you have an individual vehicle record type file, typically they do not have a begin time, end time in your header. So there isn't anything that necessarily tells Jackalope when this data began recording and when this data ended recording. But when you've got only maybe one lane for a particular interval of data, maybe at midnight only one vehicle goes by on your positive lane 1, we can rectangularize the data and know that there was also collection going on in all of the rest of the lanes, but no vehicles passed. So we can automatically put a 0 in there, meaning there was collection going on, but no vehicles were recorded, which is, as we all know, different than a null in that interval. So this was left out there to deal with or introduce users to the fact that there is a rectangularization that Jackalope can do on individual vehicle records, and it's a setting. and you can let me know when you've got data that does that, and we can put that setting in there for any device that you want us to do that for. We added an asterisk on the monthly calendar report. This was for Missouri, and so making it very easy to notice if you print your MV01 out, what dates had no AADT notes or notes associated with them. And importance for that for Missouri was they print the MV01 before running annual or monthly, and then they can find data that they need to take care of before they run the monthly, and then run monthly and not have to go clean up afterwards. We had Diamond Omega new module written. Larimer brought it to our attention, but I believe even other states ended up having that, possibly Idaho, maybe Kansas, I can't recall. So we added the new module for the Diamond Omega files. We dealt with all data in the length and class speed bin 1 QCs. And I think it was this JIRA when we discovered to revise the way the QC was working for those, that it's going to bring up a discussion item in our agenda later. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow, about what should we be doing with data that isn't in any bin from a length or a class or a speed. You know, we don't know what it is, but what do we do with it? There isn't an unclassified length bin, and so that's for discussion. There were cases where turning movement files were being processed, and maybe there was too many sites in the file, maybe too much data in the file. Anyway, we expanded the ability to upload all sizes. There were new PRN formats for the IRD files, and I think they call it IRD, but maybe ITC is the format or the original reader for the PRN format, because most of you will know that IRD is typically a bin file format. Idaho is submitting data that comes to them from other agencies, and they make note of the fact that it's from another agency, and now there will be reports that can reflect that it wasn't collected by Idaho. It was submitted by a different agency. Oh, so when you have individual vehicle records, right, you've got hundreds of thousands of records, but you might want to export them into CSV format. So if you are in your batch and you click on your QC and you have the product viewer up, you can adjust how the export function works, and it will obey your column settings. And there are tons of settings in there because, as you know, individual vehicle records could contain lots and lots of values. And so we made improvements to that. That was an Idaho user thing. We changed the DSO4 report to work for continuous speed data and added how many lanes that report could handle. Previously, that was a short-term speed report, but now it works for both. We added a continuous, a 15-minute length report that would be for continuous and short-term. Those are just some of the things that I pulled out of the release notes that might be of interest to some of the people. And then when we do the new release, we also update the user's guide to encompass any of the new instructions that might be necessary, new functionality or change in functionality. And so we can currently have the user guide out on a URL that Laura has shared with everyone. Also, when I send out the release notes, I send out a copy of the most current user guide. And coming in the future, we will have a link in the Jackalope interface that you can click on, and it will bring you to the user guide. That's a JIRA out there. Okay, so I am a few minutes early. Does anyone have any questions on anything I said?
Catherine, this is Christy. Will the link to the user guide still go to Dropbox? Or will it be something?
I don't think so. Joe would have to answer that, but I don't think so.
You don't think it'll go to Dropbox? Is that what you said, Catherine?
Yeah.
I mean, we can host it. So the problem, Christy, is that even if it's a public Dropbox URL, you are blocked by your firewall.
I had to get special permission from our lawyers to access Dropbox and Google Docs, which I would have to do every year. And it took me like 4 months. So I just got access to the user guide on Friday.
Wow. So like if you just had a, I mean, there's 101 different hosting opportunity or options out there. So you're basically saying no Dropbox, no. I mean, we could honestly.
I think it's something that has to be then, like, I'm not the expert on that. I think there's probably a contact in either our IT department that they probably have some sort of something they can share with any vendor to say, this is what should happen. Like, I don't want to get in the middle of that because it's just way too many emails back and forth.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's a couple options. I mean, we could bundle it with Jackalope, and it could be on your local server and referenced through a URL, just like any of the other buttons here. Otherwise, it's just a matter of knowing what are the acceptable hosted solution. Yeah, and Susie's saying, can we have a user document link available? And I think the answer is yes, but it's a matter of where that link goes. If it goes to Dropbox, of course, that won't work for Christy. So again, it could be, we could bundle it with the Jackalope version, so it's just another file on the local, the same place you'd go to get Jackalope. That would be one option.
Yeah, and they gave us access, but only 3 people. So it's only
Dropbox?
like me, John, and Ian are given access to Dropbox and Google Docs. They're not going to give it to, because they have to monitor everything that then comes through based on our access. So,
I mean, is there an acceptable hosting platform?
I would have to ask them what to do. I don't know.
I mean, we know we can serve web content from your application servers. So maybe that's, the best, you wouldn't get you'd only get the one that's most up to date as of that version. You wouldn't be able to access.
Which is the same as me emailing it.
What's that?
Which is almost the same as me emailing it. So they don't get the live, updated shared document.
Right. I mean, if they want the live updated, we need a place to host it. That's the bottom line.
Well, the whole press for even having it in in Jackalope initially was for Minnesota because they couldn't get to Dropbox. So I'm almost thinking that it becomes a little less urgent. I don't know if any other states have problems with the fact that it's just an emailed version, an emailed PDF, or maybe everyone else has no problem accessing the Dropbox.
And overall, doesn't the document doesn't it stay pretty static unless there are new features that are being offered? So overall,
well, we update it as any new features are coming on or changes happen. So, we don't wait till the end of the release to necessarily do all of the documentation. We kind of do it as things are happening.
Right, but overall during the year, maybe, or I mean, are there a lot? So once Minnesota gets a copy,
We don't really have to go in the specifics of Minnesota. I just wanted to know, because like my legal team is like, okay, well this year we'll give you the pass, but then next year they're gonna fix it. And I'm just specifying, like, is the link, if the link is just go in the Dropbox, then I need to just get back to my legal team to say they're misunderstanding that. That's all.
I'm gonna mute everybody real quickly, and so unmute yourself if. All right, can you hear me? All right, so I mean, we just need to know what the right option is. We're not trying to be difficult. It's just where do we put it? Don't you guys use Box? That's where we get files and things like that.
Mean to pacify, we use MFT. Again, I mean, I think my IT person, I invited him to this, our embedded staff person. So
Okay.
Stephen, if you're on, just Stephen Pelka, just make note of this. It's not something that us as users, we even know or have access to know. Like I had to put in an IT request just to get the access. So
Okay.
kind of locked down here.
I mean, it's not hard to embed the document in the WAR that we send out in, you know, when you get a deployment, and then your link would just go to the same place your Jackalope or Jackalope links go to. But otherwise, I mean, it'd be better to have it posted on the cloud somewhere. But we just need to know what that is.
Unmuted. How about when the time comes to work on this particular JIRA to embed it somewhere or make a link in Jackalope? I'll send out some emails, especially to Minnesota, to make sure, since they definitely have limitations at this point with what the process is right now, and we can regroup on what's acceptable or what's not. And that may change in the next year by the time we get around to it. So I'll send out a query and see.
I made that note too. Before we work on it, let's make sure it's a solution usable for all.
Yeah, do other clients have kind of that sort of restrictive access? Can other people get to Dropbox generally, or Google Docs? Or is it always kind of a pain?
In Kansas, we are restricted, but it's just a matter of filling out their, whatever it is, 534 form and saying that we need access to this Dropbox.
Okay. Do you know, Bill, if there's like some non-Dropbox thing that Kansas would accept, some hosting platform? Without
No,
you having to build
the
up
general rule, the general rule is anything that's the file sharing has to be cleared.
Okay.
Any other questions on anything I covered before we take a 10-minute break?
Catherine, this is Vicki. I just was hoping that maybe you could go back to, you had your list and it was 4012. If you could kind of go over that, because I believe you said that one was for Idaho, that would be great.
Oh, yes. Let me find an, I'll just get into an Idaho batch and quickly show what I am talking about. So I think Tony uses the individual vehicle record exports. And so let me find a batch that might have IVRs in it. Let me just see if I can find one. Okay, so when you click on IVR, so here we've opened a batch, a file that has data that includes individual vehicle records. If you click here, at the bottom, for your column chooser, you can put, you know, all of these various things that are encompassed in an individual vehicle record. So add all of these things, say okay, and then you can export it to CSV or Excel for use later. And then you've got 9,765 records. But the importance of the JIRA was that now when you export it, it will obey these settings that you have put in your screen, and it will export them in this same order.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, typically, yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Kat. This is Russell from Weststop. That was actually 4012 was for our speed reports. That was
Did I look at
but
the wrong?
it's pretty similar to this, where we were just we had like a 6-lane site and it wasn't showing all the lanes basically. So I think it's a very similar fix for the export.
Okay.
So,
Okay, then
yeah,
there, I
just
bet you
wanted
there
to
were
chime in.
two.
Yeah.
Okay, I bet you there were
Yeah.
two JIRAs very similarly labeled. I just pulled one over. Okay, so Russell, you kept track of that actual number, but Idaho had one very similarly, and so the fix was probably very similar for both cases. But yes, if we look at the large list of releases, we'd probably find the other one that was Idaho specific in there. But good job on memorizing your JIRA numbers.
Are
Okay,
these
so
JIRAs all, so it's a list for like a bunch of different states. So which ones are like custom to certain states, or are like all of them for like all states?
Yeah, it's everything we've done in this past version that's of interest to anybody. So it doesn't include things that are totally not interesting. Maybe I don't know. When I create it, there are just some that I don't put in there because there's no meaning of it. But yeah, it's everything we've done for everybody.
So everyone, like when we get a new version, we should check all of them in our validation.
If you want to. I don't think that's what all states do. I think they rely on us doing all of the testing. I think for the most part, people, I mean, there's things that aren't of interest to you or that you won't use, so there's probably no reason to. I think the point being, if I have created a JIRA for you because you've reported something to me and I reply back, and or Laura replies back and says, hey, you know, we created JIRA blah, blah, blah. When we send a new release note, check against what we've said that we've created for JIRAs for you, and you would want to check those that I'm saying I did for you, or the new functionality things, which is what I was saying. In the future, I'll call it out a little bit more noticeably, but every one of these have been tested by us, and then if it's been specific for someone, you know, those are the ones that I would expect each state to look at.
Okay, everyone, we're going to do a helpful tips session right now. This will be a little bit of a repetition of some of the tickets that Catherine just described to everybody. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a couple of things actually on my screen that maybe better demonstrate some of the tickets that Catherine was talking about. So many of you may have already seen this. Some of you, I think, may have this in your versions, but if you don't, you will see it when you get the new RC. So if you haven't seen it before, it'll be coming soon. If you were to look in a batch now, you will see a section here, View Files, and you can tell Jackalope which types of files you want to look at. I know some users submit batches that have maybe 200 files in them, and it's a little bit cumbersome to go through and scroll down trying to catch all of the QC messages you might want to look at. So you can now view files by all. Get this up here. all of the files in a batch. You can view them by only errored files. So that's any type of error, like a file type is unrecognized, a file did not bind, or there's QC errors. You can view just unbound files and just deal with those, make your binding rules. You can just view files by QC message error failures. So this batch only had one file that errored with QC messages, so you'll see those there. And the last is unable to read, so that's unrecognized file type sorts of messages. So in case you didn't know that that was coming, there's that, if that's helpful to anyone. This next piece has been around for quite a while, but I don't know that anybody necessarily knows of it or ever uses it. I know I use it on a regular basis when I'm doing file testing. If you hover over the site number, and you get a map as long as there's lat long, and you left click once and hover over the rebind button, you get a little bit of information first of all. You can see that this file was bound with BSR, that's bind site rule, so binding rule, and it gives you the internal ID of the binding rule that was used to bind this particular file. I wanted to show you one other type of binding message. Here's another file. If I hover, left click once, it says bound by IM, interpretation module. So these files were bound using an interpretation module, not a binding rule. So that's a little bit of information you can get to help you know if something's binding improperly. Was it done by the interpretation module for some reason and isn't binding correctly, and you look into it that way, or was it using a binding rule? You can actually go into your binding rules, find the rule in question, and then figure out if there's a problem with that and it should be edited or deleted or that sort of thing. One other thing you can do is if you're...
Sorry to interrupt you, Laura. I don't know if you were going to do this, but could you show how a site that says it was bound with that rule, how you would go find that rule
Sure, let's do that.
Review it? Okay.
We'll go back to my other demonstration batch. Left click, hover here, and let me just write that number down really quickly. So kind of a little bit long, 7236. So first of all, what I would do is write that down just for my reference, but I'm going to go and look at station 0310810. I'm going to open the link in a new tab. I'm going to go to site admin binding command. First, instead of looking for an internal ID, I'm going to look for site, and I'm going to show you how to add the internal ID. But if I'm looking for station here ending in 810, there's only one. However, if there were a number of binding rules, and many of you have noticed that if you view binding rules, you might have 3 or 4 or 5 binding rules for the same site. Maybe they were created over different time spans. Maybe some are fighting with each other and they all happen to be for IRD files. The way to figure out which exact one was used for your rule is to use the column chooser here. You can add internal ID to your screen, and you'll see here 5605, that internal ID does match. So in this case, this is the binding rule that was used in the batch we were showing a moment ago to bind this file to this site and how it was done. So here is how you could determine if there were any issues within that binding rule. Does that make sense to everyone?
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure. And one other thing you can do.
Delete it. Yeah, or fix it there.
Sure. One other thing you can do inside batches you might not have known before is if you click to rebind, the first pop-up message you're going to get is that this data is going to be purged before you can rebind it. And you either say, okay, that you're fine with that purge, or you would like to cancel and go about this a different way. If you hit okay and wait a moment for your spinner to finish, you'll get the create binding rule window. If I hit X, or down at the bottom, cancel, to not proceed with that, and refresh my screen, you will see that the data purged, but I didn't proceed with rebinding. This is a trick I use sometimes if I need to do a very quick purge in a batch and I don't really want to leave this screen. My intention is just to rerun the data, or actually I determine this is bad data and I don't want to use it at all. I don't want to go to the notes screen and make a note. I don't want to click on the volume button and view the data and then create a new note. Just for a few less button clicks to do a very quick purge. This is just a quick way to do a one-time quick purge within a batch. So again, that's left clicking to view the rebind data button. I hit rebind and then I say okay to purge, but then I can cancel from there on out and decide not to continue with making a binding rule, because my point isn't really to make a binding rule, it's just to do a quick purge here. Let's see, so that's viewing within a batch, all errors. Okay. Catherine had mentioned about QC checks. This came up during last year's user conference, and I think had come up even before that then, is that users wanted to know in certain cases if a file errors, let's see, unclassified percent in negative lane 1. And they go and look at the data and they see that sure enough, negative lane 1 had errors with their unclassified percent. But they also, in scrutinizing the data, noticed that negative lane 2 had that issue and positive lane 3 had that issue, for example. But Jackalope was only giving the user the first instance of where that particular QC failed. And that was by design. It's possible if you have a very bad file that's chock full of different data types, you could have 60 messages just for one file of various QC errors. And then if you have a batch with 150 files in it, you could absolutely be inundated with operator messages that really are maybe not necessary. So I think for the most part, people were fine with just seeing one instance of each QC that fails, and then they would proceed to look into whether or not they wanted to look at all lanes themselves and make a decision. But there are cases where a person does want to possibly see every case where unclassified percent failed in every single lane that it might have failed in. So that's the internal setting Catherine was talking about. And if anybody is interested in having that setting turned on where you want to see every single instance of a file failing for every single QC for every single lane across the board, you can talk to us about that. If that is turned on and you see every QC error, that will happen for everybody that uses Jackalope in your state. That is not just a user preference where only you see all the QC messages for a file. That's going to be for everybody. So it takes a little bit of consideration if you want to turn it on. Possibly you want to turn it on, run a file, and then turn it back off if you want to see all of the messages. But I was going to show you an example of what that looks like. If the setting is turned on to show you every single error that a file has, here's class 1% failed, and it's showing positive lane 1, the roadway, the direction, negative lane 2, and that sort of thing. So you can see it's showing you quite a few. The total in this example that I'm giving were 54. So this particular file had 54 QC messages with the setting turned on to show you every single lane that had this particular message. On a normal day, the way most of you are using Jackalope and probably would continue to use Jackalope, you would only see 26 messages and only a few of them are this class 1%. We're just showing you positive lane 1 for the days, the June 11th, 12th, and 13th. You're only seeing 3 of these versus the large number here. So that was a request that was made, like I said, last user conference, and so we've put that into effect so that it's possible to show you every QC message if that's something that you want. So you can talk to Catherine or I if you want to work a little bit more in detail about trying that out, seeing if it's useful for you or that sort of thing. Any questions about that demonstration there? And then the other thing I wanted to show you was also from last time's user conference. There was a complaint, and we couldn't agree more, about how the notes screen was a little bit difficult to use as far as searching for notes. Notes were stored in the system in different ways based on whether they were generated by a file that created a QC note, which is considered a count summary note, whether the note was created by the user as a purge note or a system-wide note. And those were considered system-wide or site-specific notes that are user-created. And so coming into this screen previously, it was a bit difficult to search for a particular site or set of sites and what types of notes. And so it wasn't all that user-friendly. Later, when I show you some of the new reports that have been created since last year, there is a notes report that's kind of bare bones and just gives you a nice big long list of all types of notes using the report engine. So I'll show you that later. But just for today's demonstration of the new notes screen, right now, or when you have the new version, you will be able to do a little bit better searching through here. And there's a couple of ways you're going to be able to search. First of all, you can filter what is displayed in your screen below by selecting some sites or selecting a note type. And these are going to be described in the user guide, so you don't have to memorize this at this time. But for now, let me give you an example of if I wanted to search for sites for notes for this site. I hit enter and it's going to take a minute and it's going to refresh. These are all of the notes, whether they're system-wide, like a holiday note, let's say, for Christmas for every single site. This one was included in that. Site-specific sorts of notes or site group notes that were made by the user using the new note button here and creating a purge note, for example, or a no AADT note. And then count summary notes, and these are going to be the types of notes that are created in a batch when a file runs, like, incomplete across the roadway, those sorts of notes. You can enter more than one site in here at one time. So let's say I'm interested in these two sites. Now my screen is refreshed to show me actually either one of these that have notes on them. At that point, there's some column choosers down here. It depends on what all you want to add. For the most part, it seems people are just interested in knowing if a note existed, and then they want to double click and view the note. You can have the date it was created, begin and end date of the actual note itself. So these are data dates. So date created by the user or by the system, and then some begin and end dates of the data. Whether these were length specific notes, speed, volume. I know there's some other ones in here. No factor, no publish. If it was a purge note, that seems to be an important one. People want to know, why is no data in the system for these sites? Perhaps it has a purge note. So you can add or rearrange these sorts of columns as you see fit. Description's a good one. Let me add that one in. Actually move it up here and hit OK. And now you can see some of the descriptions here. Here's a purge note I created, a holiday site note, data cleanup because there was daylight and standard time change. And then you can see in these count summary types of notes, here are some undeleted no AADT notes that applied to these sites from files being processed. Sometimes people will wonder why they did maybe an export of data and this site's data wasn't included in the export, but they know they ran the data. Well, if a site has a no AADT note for that particular day, that data will not be exported. And so here maybe would be why somebody possibly missed deleting these notes for this data on that particular day. And then if you double click, let's double click here on one of the notes. If you double click on one of the notes, you can then see all the details that for the most part you could see in the previous screen. So we've done a bit of improvement on the notes screen, and as people start to use it a little bit more, you can let me know what things would be more useful, maybe some things that we didn't think of adding to the screen that you would really find useful in using the note screen, and we can start working through you know, fine-tuning this a bit. So that's the general idea of how the note screen will work for you when you get the next version. So any questions on using that?
This is Vicky. So I have a question. Are we able to query these notes, like for example, on the back end on our database? Can I say, give me, you know, all the sites that have no AADT notes?
Joe,
Like
that's a
SQL query.
question. Yeah, Joe, that's a question for
Okay.
you.
Yeah, so we might want to coordinate, Vicky, but yes, certainly that's the case. And probably there's already some user-friendly views that would help you rather than having to understand, oh, I've got to go get the TSID for blah, blah, blah. So that's something maybe we can talk about offline. But I think the answer is well, I know the answer is yes, it's in the database, and I'm almost positive there's a user-friendly view that will allow you to do that.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I would definitely like to do that. So I'll touch base with you.
But Joe, it's not in the public database.
Oh, is this, you're only accessing the public database, not the internal? Yes. Are you, that's a problem. When you get your web or the AWS, that will be easier. We don't have the notes over there? All right.
No, and typically, you know, if it's stuff that is noted, it doesn't even make it into the public database. So,
Yeah.
so
yeah, you would have to access our internal database, unfortunately. But once you have access to that, definitely you can, there's views.
Okay.
And just to clarify here, in case it wasn't obvious, it wasn't to me at first, is a 1 indicates that there is a purge note for length, for volume, for speed, so for all data types here. The 1 means that it applies in this case, and a 0 means not so. So here, this is not a purge note, this is a one of our informational sorts of notes, a holiday note, and that applied to length, speed, whim. So you can tell here if you just want to see all purge notes, I typed a 1 in here, all purge notes for length, but that weren't also for volume. And as I start going through here, you can see I've whittled it down. So here's all the notes in the system that were purge length only, but not including volume. And then we also have our grid exporting sorts of buttons down here. So I don't know if in the meantime, Vicky, if you were able to sort of fiddle with this a bit, you could maybe whittle down a list here of notes, maybe, and then export them to Excel in the meantime. And we can talk about how that may or may not work for you.
Okay.
Is the
Yeah,
site,
because I know.
what site is going to be shown? Like the.
Oh yeah, good question.
Yeah, like so you can dump it, but like what is it? What site is?
Yes, the site is going to be specific to this the naming convention that you're using at the time, and I shouldn't have clicked that there. I just changed it. So this screen is going to show you sites using the active naming convention that you're using here. And when you do the export, it's going to export what is exactly on the screen. Does that answer your question? So this screen is not going to give you, if you have 3 different naming conventions and all, a class ID, a site ID, and a WIM ID, it's not going to export all 3 of those for you. It's just going to export for you here what's in the screen, which is the site ID in this case.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Sure.
I also saw, Christy, that you said you all might be interested in that. So just email me and we can get you definitions for the views. Any other questions for Laura? Okay, I will share my screen. Also, I meant to mention in the most recent discussion time slot I had that we are anticipating the release for version 7 by the end of the year or early January. So in case anyone's curious about what we're demoing and talking about today, our goal is to have it out by, let's just say, beginning of 2022. So carrying on the notes, I just wanted to talk about a note that's interesting and could be used for annual that had not previously been used by anyone that I know of, and that is the no HPMS note. So when you have a site that might be contributing data to the group creation or even just to itself, we have the no HPMS note option. And if you are intending to use the no HPMS note option, you could checkbox all. And if it's nothing from that site should be used for the HPMS calculations, then you can just say all and then you're safe. But maybe it's only the class data at that site and you don't want to use the calculations for the single units and the combos and the truck type stuff. You could just do class only or volume only for Ks and Ds, the volume type statistics. But the importance of using this no HPMS note is, and this is in the user guide for the use of this note. When you put in the site that you're interested in, let's just pick one, and you give it your description, the note can exist for any day in the year that is being noted, and that site is then excluded for the year for the data type for HPMS calculations. I will move to phase 2. I was just going to call this to everyone's attention that when you're in phase 2 annual and you are generating all of your factors, it's always important to maybe hit this refresh button if you have gone in and managed sites and selected some options in how we're going to populate the sites into the list, or added sites manually yourself that you want to use in this group for calculating that set of factors. Or if you've selected a site in the screen and said remove a site from here, it's always a good idea to just hit this refresh button so that you are seeing exactly what sites were used in order to make this calculation of the group factor up above. I'm kind of going to cover stuff quickly and then maybe take some questions afterwards and maybe even have to use another time if any questions go further, but we're close on time. So I had mentioned that Kentucky wanted the ability to export short-term data. So now if you are in your reporting export data screen, when you get the new version, we now have the short-term CSV. You can use the same export menu items here. So volume or class can be exported, and pick a date range, all sites, a specific site or a site group. And instead of waiting for it to come up, let me just see if I have one from doing this recently. Yeah, here's one. So this is a set format. If you're going to be providing this to an outside user, then you'll want to define these columns. But this is, let's see if I can just do it in Notepad. Yeah.
Is there a header row?
There is not a header row.
How do we know what they are?
Jeff, I don't know if it's possible to put a header row in here. I mean, we can define it in the user guide. That's probably what we need to do, is define each column in the user guide.
Yeah, I think we could put a header row in there, but it's I think it's also defined by. Okay, so if you look, that's
For now, okay, if we don't know, then for now I'll define it in the user guide, and then we can have an internal discussion on if it's possible to put a header row. So let me make a note, and then I'll handle it that way. Also in the export screen are now the ability for your, let's just pick a TMG version, station record. Once you select station record, you'll see that you now get the option to do all sites or all sites with data. So currently in the version that everybody's running on, a station record for a given year always represents sites that have any data in this given year. Minnesota wanted to see all sites with station records, maybe to go and review fixing station record information. And so you can now just do one for all sites, and that would be any site that has station record information filled out at all. Another piece, or another new functionality is that we have virtual sites now able to copy data from site AADTs. So you could create a site that inherits site AADTs from another site. So when you are, let's bring up some sites.
Are these site ADTs that are created in phase 4 or created in AID?
They're
Or
all
does
the
it
same.
not? Okay.
Yeah, any site AADT, that site statistic, which if you created an AID, you should see on phase 4 also. I'll just open up a site. So for those of you who aren't familiar, there is a thing called virtual site in Jackalope. Virtual site is set up in the individual site screen, and you can add sites to this site that you have that's going to inherit. So let's just say we're going to build the roadway for the site that's going to inherit data, and it could inherit, let's see. There we go. This site could inherit the statistics from 0 to 0001, and the initial default behavior is to add the information from it. And the option here for the continuous short term means any hourly data. So all of the hourly data for this site will be now contributing to. So the roadway for 002, I'm sorry, 020011 will be contributed. I'll just hit save, and you'll see in the screen that this site A02 has a virtual site, and it can inherit all of the roadway data from 0 to 0011. Or the new function is able to inherit site AADTs. So virtual site, we're going to add a rule. Remember now, or read the guide or email me for questions. You can also load every lane, multiple sites that make up directions. I mean, the rules can get extremely complex. You can add and subtract lanes from another site to make up your virtual site. So there are a lot of complexities to this. Site AADT does not contribute lane data. Site AADTs are direction and roadway only. So if you select the site AADT option and then add a site to it, I think 02 is a good one, you'll notice on your drop-down menu now for this site, it can only give you roadway or direction as an option. It won't give you each individual lane for any sites at this point. And hit save. And now when you go to run, let's see, your virtual site, you will select what kind of virtual site process you want to run. Daily would run all of the data for the date range that you enter for that first site example that I gave. Site AADT would run all of the data for the date range that you put in for the site AADT. So if you are using both of these methods, you will run this 2 times, one for the daily, one for the site AADT. We have now added on the data management jobs submitted screen the virtual site process. So you will see it in your job summary. I haven't run it here in Kentucky because they don't really do this. Kansas might be a better example of this, but you would see virtual site here, and it would, like all of our other jobs submitted, show you how many tasks were created as it's completing them and when it's done. So when you hit this button, let's see if we just put something in there. It goes out and it's going to create the job, and this screen immediately, virtual site submission completed. This means it created the submission, but it's now on this screen that you will monitor in order to follow when it's finished. Yeah, it didn't create a job because there weren't really any, but you would see your job here on this screen, and it would tell you when it's finished by watching this screen, not the fact that you get this message here. We've written a new TMG speed reader. It's in the midst of being tested, so that will be in this new version coming also. And I was going to mention, I don't know if Mark Wooster's in here now. I know he was earlier, but we are also in the midst of working on the report creation spinner. I know it sounds like an easy job, but Jeff can say it's been a long process to get that whole functionality connected and working perfectly. We're still in the midst of testing that one. But when you are creating when you are creating reports in the future, the report spinner in version 7 will tell you when it's still running. And I think that is a conclusion. I'm sorry, I went a few minutes over. I'm going to open this up for questions, or maybe I don't know, Laura, have time later. I see some questions in the chat that I didn't get to answer.
Well, I think that you could just do your questions and we can start at 9 o'clock. We've had a few breaks, so probably people are okay with not needing 10 minutes right at this moment.
Okay. So I see Joe answered Aaron's question.
Jeff, did we implement the floating point multiplication? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, we have not.
Okay. So it is just subtraction.
Yes.
At some point in the future, we keep saying we're going to do this. We'd have the ability to do, so basically you multiply that number times either 1 or -1, but eventually we're going to make it so that you can do fractional numbers. So you could say this lane contributes 50% of, and this one is, something less or something like that.
Okay. And of course, email me questions or comments, and we'll be working with you in the next short while to get you guys this new version.